They say a patch a day keeps the doctor away, and Tinto delivered last week. We'll be looking at all of those patches and more, including today's open beta in This Week in Development. Hello and welcome back to This Week in Development, your show where we give you all the latest news from Tinto, whether it be patches, updates, or previously Platypus plushies. It's your one-stop shop for all things Tinto. I, as always, am your host, Alex, and we have had a busy week with multiple patches, and of course, a Tinto talk. But before we move on, let me address the platypus in the room. No, not him. This Week in Development is evolving, and we need you. Last week, we asked for your help in a community post renaming this show, which is now appearing on Mondays instead of Sundays. One reason for this, well, we'll be covering mostly previous week's content and the following week's content, but also we want to expand what this show does and include things like developer interviews down the line. So we need a catchy title. You can head over to the official post about that, or just drop some ideas in the comments of this video. Now let's get onto some patches, shall we? We had 3 patches last week: 1.0.5, the 1.0.6 hotfix, and 1.0.7, focusing on stability, bug fixes, and rebalancing. Let me quickfire some highlights, shall I? Starting with patch 1.0.5, which introduced some significant changes. Going bankrupt now reduces inflation by 25% of the current value, and repeated bankruptcies will not tank your control. We reworked how levy combat power works, and you now have to stay longer in a battle before you can manually retreat. We'll get onto levy changes a bit more in the future patches. We also continued our rebalancing efforts towards privateers, which are now harder to get rid of. And finally, a highlight from this one: the Form Union Peace Treaty from the claim throne Casus Belli is now always visible and no longer blocked by religious groups. 1.0.6 was primarily a hotfix to address the trade maintenance changes introduced in 1.0.5 by reverting them to what they were in the previous patch. It also fixed crashes related to bankruptcy, the dominant language, and clicking on alerts for Casus Belli and lacking food. Additionally, trade expenses were now calculated correctly, and anti-piracy warfare is now applied correctly. Which brings us on to the bigger 1.0.7, which focused on rebalancing the military, specifically with how good levies are and their progression throughout the ages. It added further revisions to pop demands for balancing the estate economies. It also further increased the strength of the Navy's anti-piracy effort by a large amount, and we added some new late-game levies to nobles, such as cavaliers, provincial cavalry, and gendarmerie. As you can see, we've been addressing community feedback rapidly, and even reverting some changes in which we feel the balance went too far in the wrong direction. This brings us on to Tinto Talk 89, which Johan hosted on Wednesday. Well, allow me to skip over that Tinto Talk in its entirety, because as I was about to sit down and record this, I was given the overview of patch 1.0.8, which for you should now be available as a beta, or if not at the time of watching this, will be available at some point today. First up, for those of you diving into the New World or the Italian Peninsula, we've added new content. The Aztec formable has 8 new advances, and the 2 Sicilies formable also has gained 6 new advances. As promised in our last Tinto Talk, we've made significant adjustments to the centralization versus decentralization societal value to make the choices less one-sided, particularly when it comes to managing subjects. Decentralization is now much more appealing to subject-heavy playstyles. It now increases subject loyalty to up to 30, an increase from the previous maximum of 20. Maximum decentralization now recovers estate satisfaction by an additional 2%. Each vassal and fiefdom you hold now gives you a small drift towards decentralization. Conversely, centralization will now reduce subject loyalty to up to 30. Additionally, your ruler's diplomatic ability now has an impact on subject loyalty. We've also removed the impact of maximum war exhaustion from both centralization and decentralization. One other notable government change included in this patch is the fact that estate privileges are now correctly removed if the estate no longer exists in your country, and the Settle Frontier action will no longer empty low population provinces. Now let's move on to some economy and production reworks. The much discussed economic base calculation has been changed. This is to provide a more accurate scaling and better account for your country's makeup. A new formula for economic base has been implemented, featuring different scale values on tax, population, and trade. Trade profit and subject tax levels are now correctly factored into the economical base calculations, and we've made a huge change to how pop affects your ability to build. Each 20k pops now gives an extra free building level in a location instead of the previous 200k pop requirement. This should significantly increase building capacity for high population nations. Prosperity will also now decay down to 0 by default if it's not actively being increased. We've also tweaked some of the pop demands, notably reducing the nobles' demand for lacquerware to only 10% of what it was, because you know, nobles don't need lacquerware constantly. That obsession is mine and mine. Let's move on to some military updates, shall we? Based on your feedback and our Tinto Talk discussions, we've refined combat and military management. We've completed a full refactoring of several combat algorithms, including damage dealing, initiative, and combat speed. And we've exposed this information in more helpful tooltips. Doing a shattered retreat now results in only a 10% loss to strength instead of the crippling 50% loss it was before, and levies now correctly disband if the locations they come from are lost. The cost of transporting levies now scales with their size, making them cost the same to transport as regulars. And finally, looking at diplomacy and interface fixes, this patch introduces numerous quality of life improvements. The conciliatory diplomatic stance no longer increases subject loyalty, but now correctly increases diplomatic reputation. The border percentage opinion mechanic from EU4 has been added, which will create a bit more conflict between neighbours. We've added a new trade range map mode, which defaults to showing all the markets within your own trade range, helping you to plan your mercantile efforts better. The demand unlawful territory diplomatic action will now automatically release a completely new tag instead of granting the land directly to the Emperor, preventing the Emperor border gore issue that we had. However, our HRE owners might be a bit upset by that. You can now hover over the number of max buildings/RGO levels in the production tab to see the detailed reason for those max levels. We've also added control and shift functionalities to the upgrade building button, making it faster to upgrade multiple building levels. That covers the highlights for patch 1.0.8, and that concludes this Week in Development, for however long this show is still called that, and that's all we have time for this week. With all these fixes, reworks, and new content, we hope you have an even better time shaping your empires. Let me know in the comments what you're most excited about in the new patch, and until next time, be ambitious.